The laughter echoed through the crystalline halls of the Galactic Assembly, a sound that would have been melodic if not for its cruel undertones. Ambassador Kelton Voss watched from his designated platform, the smallest one in the chamber, as the representatives of 47 star nations pointed appendages, tentacles, and energy projections in his direction. The human delegation of 12 looked impossibly small among the thousands of beings that filled the cosmic amphitheater. "Observe the bipedal mammals," wheezed the Skorthaki delegate, its gill slits fluttering with what passed for amusement among its kind. "They believe their primitive world deserves recognition in the assembly. What technology do they possess? What wisdom can they offer? They have not even mastered faster-than-light travel independently." The Yilthani representative, a being of pure geometric patterns that shifted across its crystalline form, projected contempt in waves of amber light. Their homeworld still suffers from resource conflicts. They wage war upon themselves. These humans seek to join civilizations that transcended such barbarism eons ago. Kelton's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady as he activated the translation matrix. "Honored Assembly, humanity may be young, but we have qualities that—" Qualities. The interruption came from Prex Volmundor, the seven-armed cephalopod whose species had conquered 12 star systems through sheer intellectual superiority. "Your qualities are precisely what make you unsuitable. You are violent, unpredictable, and worst of all, emotional. Logic and reason govern civilized space, not the chaotic impulses that drive your kind." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as cosmic snickering. The Hexarch Coalition's insectoid delegates created a chittering symphony, while the energy beings of the Luminous Collective pulsed in synchronized mockery. Even the normally stoic Vrex Empire's silicon-based representatives allowed their crystalline forms to resonate with what passed for laughter in their mineral culture. Kelton's second-in-command, Commander Naya Fentress, stepped forward despite protocol. Her eyes blazed with controlled fury. "You judge us for our emotions, yet your own prejudices blind you to our potential. Humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that would have destroyed lesser species. We have a gift for adaptation born of desperation," scoffed the ethereal counselor Mixathera, whose form flickered between dimensions. "True advancement comes from transcending base survival instincts, not wallowing in them. Your species clings to concepts like hope and courage, as if they were tools of progress rather than evolutionary holdovers from a primitive past. The Assembly's prime mediator, an ancient being known only as the Arbitron, raised its multifaceted consciousness to restore order. The petition of the species designation human has been reviewed. Their technological level, insufficient. Their societal development, primitive. Their mental capacity, limited by emotional interference. The motion to grant membership is denied, as all. The gavel of pure sound struck, creating ripples through space-time itself. Kelton felt something crack inside his chest. Not his ribs, but his faith in diplomatic solutions. Around him, his fellow humans stood in stunned silence as the assembly began to disperse, already dismissing them as irrelevant. But Naya leaned close to his ear, her whisper barely audible above the subsiding laughter. "The Prometheus Protocol?" Kelton's eyes hardened as he looked out at the retreating forms of beings who saw humanity as nothing more than an amusing curiosity. They had come seeking partnership, offering friendship and cooperation. They had been met with condescension and dismissal. "Send the signal," he said quietly. "It's time they learned what happens when you mistake humanity's greatest strength for weakness." As the human delegation filed out of the assembly chamber, none of the alien species noticed the subtle electromagnetic pulse that emanated from Kelton's seemingly primitive communication device. light years away, receiving stations throughout human space, began relaying a simple message to ships that had been waiting in the darkness between stars, ships that carried passengers the galaxy had never seen before, and hopefully never would again. The real humans were coming. Deep in the Kuiper Belt, beyond the reach of conventional sensors, the battlecruiser Fenris Unleashed received the signal. Captain Yorick Threnody stood in the command center's center, his scarred hands resting on a console that most sapient species would have considered a weapon of mass destruction. The bridge around him hummed with barely contained energy, its surfaces blackened from countless battles that never appeared in any official records. "Signal confirmed, Captain," reported his tactical officer, a woman whose call sign was simply Reaper, and whose real name had been classified so deeply that even she had forgotten it. "Prometheus protocol is active. The diplomats have been unsuccessful." Yorick's weathered face showed no surprise. At 57, he had seen enough of the galaxy to know that peaceful first contact was a luxury humanity could rarely afford. His crew, hand-picked from the darkest corners of human military history, began their preparations with mechanical precision. These were not the bright-eyed explorers who had gone to the assembly. These were the humans who emerged when exploration failed. "Communications. Patch me through to the network," Yorick commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing 12 other figures scattered across the void. Each commanded a vessel that shouldn't exist according to the treaties humanity had signed with itself. The Ghost Fleet, they called it. Ships that had been officially decommissioned, crews that had been officially disbanded, weapons that had been officially destroyed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Yorick began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of human warfare distilled into perfect calm. "It appears our species requires a more direct introduction to galactic society." Admiral Vex Kerrigan, commanding the dreadnought Human Nature, allowed herself a predatory smile. Her ship's AI core contained the accumulated tactical knowledge of every human conflict since gunpowder, and several that had never happened. "The assembly rejected us, I take it?" With considerable enthusiasm, Yorick confirmed. "They find us too emotional, too primitive, too human." Captain Zeth Ironhold of the stealth frigate Silent Thunder leaned forward, his cybernetic implants glowing softly in the darkness of his bridge. "How many species were present?" 47 star nations, approximately 10,000 representatives. "Ah." Zeth's smile was purely mechanical, expression programmed into his reconstructed face. "A target-rich environment." The fleet commanders began their coordination with the efficiency that had once conquered a hostile homeworld. The ethereal collective would learn what human emotion looked like when channeled through quantum torpedoes. The Skorthaki would discover how primitive humans could be when their primitive instincts were augmented by technology born from necessity rather than enlightenment. Meanwhile, at the assembly station, Ambassador Kelton maintained his diplomatic facade even as he felt the subtle vibrations that indicated massive ships translating into real space at the system's edge. The alien delegates had returned to their comfortable chambers, secure in their superiority and already forgetting the amusing humans who had dared to request membership. Commander Naya monitored her hidden instruments, watching as gravitational anomalies began appearing throughout the system. The Ghost Fleet was arriving in stages, using techniques that human scientists had developed while the galaxy's advanced species had been content with their ancient, predictable methods of faster-than-light travel. "How long?" Kelton asked quietly. 18 hours until they reach the station," Naya replied. "The assembly won't detect them until it's too late to matter." Kelton activated his personal recorder, knowing that what he was about to say would either make him a hero or a war criminal in the history books, assuming there were any humans left to write history when this was over. Personal log, Ambassador Kelvin Voss, Terran Diplomatic Corps. Today, humanity was judged insufficient for membership in galactic civilization. The assembly found us too emotional, too violent, too unpredictable to join their perfect society. They are about to learn that they were correct on all counts. What they failed to consider is that sometimes the monsters are exactly what the situation requires. Outside the station, space itself began to ripple as the Ghost Fleet shed its cloaking fields. Ships that had been designed not for exploration or trade, but for the singular purpose of making other ships, and the beings aboard them, cease to exist. The Galactic Assembly was about to meet the humans they had actually summoned with their rejection, not the diplomats who sought peace, but the warriors who ensured there would be a species left to make peace possible. The Galactic Assembly's morning session began with the usual bureaucratic efficiency of a civilization that had perfected order over millennia. Representatives filtered into their designated areas, discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes with the casual air of beings who had never known true conflict. The humans, they assumed, had departed in shame after their rejection the previous day. Prex Volmundor was reviewing mining rights negotiations when his sensory cluster detected something impossible. "Curious," he muttered, his 7 arms manipulating different data streams simultaneously. "The gravitational readings are inconsistent." The Yilthani representative's crystalline form shifted to amber patterns of concern. "Elaborate Prex? There. Appear to be massive objects in this system that our sensors cannot fully resolve. The quantum signatures suggest artificial construction, but the stealth capabilities are beyond our detection protocols. Before Volmundor could investigate further, the Assembly's central hologram activated without authorization. The familiar face of Ambassador Kelton Voss appeared, but his expression had changed. Gone was the hopeful diplomat seeking acceptance. In his place stood something far more dangerous, a human who had run out of patience. "Honored Assembly," Kelton began, his voice carrying across every translation matrix in the chamber. "Yesterday, you rejected humanity's petition for membership. You cited our emotional nature, our violent tendencies, and our primitive development as disqualifying factors." The ethereal counselor. Mixthera flickered with annoyance. "This communication is unauthorized. Security, remove this—" "You are correct," Kelton continued, ignoring the interruption. "We are emotional. We are violent. We are, by your standards, primitive. However, you made one critical error in your assessment." The hologram expanded, and suddenly the assembly found itself looking not at Kelton's face, but at a tactical display of their solar system. 47 red dots surrounded the station, each one representing a ship that shouldn't exist. "You assumed," Kelton said, his voice dropping to something that resembled a whisper but carried the force of a threat, "that the humans you met yesterday were the only humans you would ever meet." Captain Yorick Threnodi's scarred visage replaced Kelton's on the display. His eyes held the accumulated weight of every human war, every desperate fight for survival, every moment when their species had chosen violence not from malice, but from necessity. "I am Captain Yorick Threnody of the Terran Defense Corps," he announced. "Yesterday, you met our diplomats. Today, you meet our soldiers." The assembly erupted into chaos. The Skorthaki delegates' gills slits sealed in terror, while the Hexarch Coalition's insectoids began emitting pheromones of pure panic. Even the usually composed Arbitron's multifaceted consciousness seemed to stutter as it processed the implications. "This is an act of war!" shrieked the Vrex Empire's silicon-based representative, its crystalline form resonating with frequencies of outrage. "No," Yorick corrected, his smile visible even through the static of the transmission. "This is an introduction. You wanted to know what humanity could contribute to galactic civilization. Allow us to demonstrate." The tactical display zoomed in on one of the smaller assembly ships, a collective patrol vessel that had arrived late to the session. As the assembly watched in horror, space around the ship began to twist. The vessel's hull, composed of materials that could withstand stellar radiation and meteor impacts, began to crumple like paper. "Impossible," breathed Volmundor. "No known technology can manipulate gravitational fields with such precision." "Known technology," emphasized Admiral Vex Kerrigan as her image joined Yorick's on the display. "The keyword being known. You see, while your civilizations achieved peace and prosperity, humanity faced a rather different challenge. We had to innovate or perish, repeatedly." The patrol vessel imploded silently, its compressed remains forming, a perfect sphere that drifted peacefully among the debris. The message was clear. This had been done with surgical precision, not as an accident of overwhelming force. "You criticized our emotional nature," continued Captain Zeth Ironhold, his cybernetic features flickering into view. "You failed to understand that emotion, properly channeled, becomes dedication. Dedication to protecting our species at any cost." The assembly sat in stunned silence as the reality of their situation became clear. They had not rejected a petition for membership. They had issued a declaration of war against a species that had turned warfare into an art form out of sheer necessity. "However," Kelton's voice returned, now carrying a tone that somehow managed to be both diplomatic and terrifying, "humanity prefers cooperation to conflict. We would still welcome the opportunity to join your assembly under revised terms." The Arbitron finally found its voice, its cosmic consciousness vibrating with barely controlled panic. What? What are your terms?" Kelton's smile was perfectly diplomatic and absolutely predatory. "Simple. Full membership with all rights and privileges. A recognition that humanity's unique perspective might be valuable in certain situations. And perhaps a small demonstration of just how effective human emotional irrationality can be when properly applied." As if summoned by his words, space around the assembly station began to fill with ships that defied every principle of advanced engineering. They were crude, brutal, and absolutely terrifying in their obvious effectiveness. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one you had underestimated. The assembly's security forces responded with the efficiency of a civilization that had maintained peace for 10,000 years, which is to say, poorly. Their patrol ships, designed for ceremonial displays and minor piracy suppression, found themselves facing vessels that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than limitations. Admiral Vex Kerrigan watched the unfolding chaos from the bridge of human nature with professional interest. The collective's energy-based defenders attempted to form a perimeter around the station, their crystalline hulls gleaming with defensive matrices that could allegedly repel any known weapon. "Fire Solution Gamma," she ordered calmly. "The dreadnoughts. Primary weapon wasn't a cannon or a beam or any energy projection that the galaxy's militaries would recognize. Instead, it fired pure mathematics. Equations that redefined local space-time until the target found itself occupying the same coordinates as its own past self. The resulting temporal paradox was resolved by the universe's tendency to choose the simplest solution. The target ceased to exist. 3 collective vessels simply vanished, leaving behind only the faintest ripples in space-time and a growing understanding among the assembly that they were facing something beyond their comprehension. "Fascinating," observed Captain Zeth Ironhold as his stealth frigate Silent Thunder materialized inside the station's defensive perimeter. "Their shields are calibrated for energy attacks. They've never encountered kinetic weapons delivered via quantum tunneling." His ship fired what appeared to be simple metal projectiles. Simple, except that they existed in 17 dimensions, simultaneously, and struck their targets from angles that didn't technically exist in normal space. The result was holes punched through armor that should have been impenetrable, perfectly circular and cauterized, as if reality itself had been edited. Inside the assembly chamber, panic had given way to a more primal fear. Representatives who had never known violence, watched their security forces being systematically dismantled by ships that shouldn't be able to function, using weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The ethereal counselor. Mixathera flickered between dimensions, desperately seeking escape routes that didn't exist. This is impossible. Our defenses were designed by the greatest minds in the galaxy. Yes, agreed Ambassador Kelton, his image still dominating the chamber's displays. The greatest minds in a galaxy at peace. Humanity, on the other hand, had the advantage of being forced to think about nothing but war for most of our existence. The Skorthaki delegates' gill slits were sealed so tightly they resembled scars on its elongated skull. What do you want? From us? It wheezed. Want? Kelton seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. We want nothing. We're simply providing the demonstration you requested. Yesterday you questioned what humanity could contribute to galactic civilization. Today, you're seeing our primary area of expertise. Captain Yorick Threnodi's weathered features appeared on the display, his expression carrying the weight of every battle humanity had ever fought. You called us emotional, violent, and primitive. You were correct. But you failed to ask yourselves a simple question. What happens when an emotional, violent, primitive species survives long enough to develop interstellar technology? As if to emphasize his point, space around the station began to fracture. Not metaphorically, actual cracks appeared in the fabric of space-time as the Ghost Fleet's reality-warping engines pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. Through these cracks, glimpses of other dimensions became visible. Dimensions where different laws of physics applied and where humanity had learned to fight beings that made the Assembly's most advanced species look like children playing with sticks. The Hexarch Coalition's insectoid representatives had begun emitting pheromones of submission, their entire collective consciousness unified in a single message: surrender. Impossible, repeated Prex Volmundor, though his 7 arms had ceased their frantic calculations. No species could develop such technology without destroying themselves first. Most species, yes, agreed Admiral Kerrigan. Most species would have self-destructed long before reaching the stars. Humanity had a different approach. We learned to channel our destructive impulses outward. The tactical display updated, showing the Ghost Fleet's positions around the system. Each ship was positioned at a point that, according to conventional military theory, was impossible to defend. Yet they held their positions with casual confidence, as if daring the galaxy's finest military minds to try to dislodge them. You see, continued Kelton, his diplomatic tone somehow making his words more threatening than any battle cry, humanity learned something that your peaceful civilizations never had to discover. Sometimes the only way to preserve what you love is to become something terrifying to those who would threaten it. The Vrex Empire's representative, its crystalline form now resonating with frequencies of pure terror, managed to speak. What are you? Kelton's smile was gentle, diplomatic, and absolutely terrifying. We are what you created when you mistook our offer of friendship for weakness. We are what humanity becomes when cooperation fails. Outside the station, reality continued to bend around the Ghost Fleet's presence. They were demonstrating not just their military superiority, but their fundamental understanding of something the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes, the most effective diplomacy was the kind backed by the credible threat of absolute annihilation. The Assembly was beginning to understand that their rejection of humanity hadn't been a diplomatic slight. It had been a declaration of war against a species that had perfected warfare beyond anything they could imagine. The Assembly chamber had fallen into a silence that transcended mere absence of sound. It was the silence of civilizations confronting their own mortality, the quiet that comes when beings who had considered themselves the apex of evolution suddenly realize they are children playing in a sandbox, while adults discuss matters of life and death. Arbitron, the ancient consciousness that had mediated disputes for millennia, finally spoke. Its multifaceted awareness rippled with frequencies that hadn't been heard since the galaxy's last great war, eons ago. What? What do you require for peace? Ambassador Kelton's image remained perfectly composed, his diplomatic training evident, even as he negotiated from a position of absolute power. Peace? I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation, honored Arbitron. We're not at war. This is simply a cultural exchange. The Yilthani representative's crystalline form shifted through patterns of confusion. Cultural exchange? Indeed, confirmed Captain Yorick Threnody, his scarred features appearing beside Kelton's on the display. Yesterday, you shared your culture's values with us. Order, logic, peaceful coexistence. Today, we're sharing ours. Adaptation, innovation, survival at any cost. Admiral Vex Kerrigan's predatory smile widened as sensor readings flooded the Assembly's displays. For instance, while you've been talking, we've been analyzing your station's defensive systems, your fleet compositions, your communication networks, and your governmental structures. In the time it took you to process our arrival, we've developed 17 different strategies for complete galactic conquest. 18. Corrected Captain Zeth Ironhold, his cybernetic features flickering with satisfaction. I just finished calculations for a temporal approach that would make this conversation never have happened while ensuring humanity's dominance across all possible timelines. The horror on the Assembly representatives' faces was almost comical. These beings, who had mastered faster-than-light travel and energy manipulation, were discovering that they had never truly understood warfare. To them, conflict was an aberration to be quickly resolved through negotiation and compromise. To humanity, warfare was a science that had been perfected through necessity and refined through desperation. However, Kelton continued, his tone shifting back to diplomatic courtesy, humanity prefers cooperation to conquest. We would be delighted to join your assembly as equal members, contributing our unique perspectives to galactic civilization. Prex Volmundor's 7 arms had stopped their calculations entirely. Equal members, after this demonstration, after this introduction, Kelton corrected gently. You see, the humans you met yesterday, myself, Commander Fentress, our diplomatic team, we represent humanity's aspirations. We are who we hope to become. The humans you're meeting today represent humanity's capabilities. They are who we can become when necessary. The distinction hit the Assembly like a physical blow. They had not simply misjudged humanity's power, they had fundamentally misunderstood the species' nature. Humans weren't simply warriors or diplomats. They were both, simultaneously, with the ability to shift between modes as circumstances required. The ethereal counselor Mixathera flickered desperately between dimensions, finding no escape from the reality that humanity's presence had created. You're asking us to welcome predators into our civilization. No, replied Admiral Kerrigan, her expression becoming genuinely serious for the first time. We're asking you to welcome guardians. The distinction seemed subtle, but the Ghost Fleet's positioning around the system suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't arranged for attack, they were positioned to defend. Every ship was placed to protect the Assembly Station and its representatives from external threats. You see, continued Captain Threnody, humanity learned something during our violent history that peaceful civilizations often forget. Predators don't announce themselves. They don't make demands or issue ultimatums. They simply attack when their targets are weakest. We, on the other hand, added Kelton, announced our presence, demonstrated our capabilities, and made our intentions clear. We're not predators. We're what predators fear. The Assembly began to understand the true nature of humanity's offer. They weren't seeking membership to exploit galactic civilization. They were offering to protect it. The Ghost Fleet wasn't a threat to the Assembly. It was a shield against the threats the Assembly had never imagined. Consider, suggested Admiral Kerrigan, what happens when your peaceful civilization encounters a species that hasn't learned to channel violence into protection? What happens when you meet actual predators? The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations contemplated the possibility that their peace might not be permanent, that their order might not be universal. The choice is yours, Kelton concluded. Accept humanity as equal partners and gain allies who understand both diplomacy and warfare. Reject us and hope that you never encounter anything in the dark between stars that requires the skills we've developed. As if summoned by his words, the Ghost Fleet's sensors detected something at the edge of the system. Massive ships translating out of hyperspace, their energy signatures unlike anything in the Assembly's databases. Unknown vessels, approaching with clear hostile intent. The Assembly was about to learn whether humanity's offer of protection was as real as their demonstration of power. The proximity alarms throughout the Assembly station began their harmonic progression from concern to terror as the sensor readings clarified. 12 massive vessels had emerged from hyperspace at the system's edge, their hulls bearing markings that no galactic database recognized. They were triangular constructs of dark metal, bristling with weapon arrays that radiated malevolence across multiple spectrums. Unknown contacts, reported the station's AI in the flat tone reserved for catastrophic events. Hull composition, unknown. Energy signatures, hostile. Intent, presumably aggressive based on weapon system activation. Prex Volmundor's 7 arms moved frantically across his console, trying to make sense of readings that defied comprehension. Impossible. No species in our databases matches these signatures. Where did they come from? The ethereal counselor. Mix Thera flickered through dimensions of increasing panic. The Outer Rim monitoring stations would have detected any approaching fleet, unless they don't originate from our galaxy, finished the Yilthani representative, its crystalline form now pulsing with patterns of existential dread. Ambassador Kelton's image remained calm on the central display, though those who knew humans well enough, which was essentially no one in the Assembly, might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. Honored Assembly, it appears we have visitors. Captain Yorick Threnodi's scarred features appeared beside Kelton's, his expression shifting from diplomatic courtesy to something far more primal. Admiral Kerrigan, sensor analysis. Extragalactic origin confirmed, reported the Admiral, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone who had faced impossible odds before. Technology base appears to be biomechanical hybrid. Energy output suggests planet killer capability. Intent is clearly hostile. They're targeting the station. The Assembly representatives watched in growing horror as their most advanced defensive systems attempted to analyze the approaching fleet. Every scan returned the same result. Insufficient data, unknown threat, probability of successful defense approaching 0. Our shields can't stop weapons of this magnitude, whispered the Skorthaki. Delegate, its gill slits fluttering with terror. Our fleets are designed for law enforcement, not warfare. We're defenseless. Yes, agreed Captain Zeth Ironhold, his cybernetic features showing what might have been sympathy. You are. The unknown fleet began its approach, moving with the inevitable patience of a predator that knew its prey was trapped. As they drew closer, details became visible on their hulls. Organic growths that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, weapon ports that dilated like eyes, and most disturbing of all, sections that appeared to be composed of captured vessels, from dozens of different species. By the void, breathed the Arbitron, its ancient consciousness recoiling from the implications. They're collectors. They harvest entire civilizations. It would appear so, confirmed Admiral Kerrigan. Sensor readings indicate incorporated technology from at least 40 different species, none of which appear to have survived the encounter. The Assembly faced the nightmare that every peaceful civilization eventually confronts. the discovery that the universe contains things that view peace as weakness and civilization as a resource to be harvested. What do we do? The question came from a dozen representatives simultaneously, their various forms of communication creating a chorus of desperation. We could try to negotiate, suggested the Yilthani representative, though its light patterns indicated little hope. With collectors? Captain Threnodi's laugh was harsh. You don't negotiate with a virus. You don't reason with entropy. You don't make deals with things that exist solely to consume. The unknown fleet had reached weapons range. The assembly's sensors detected energy buildups that could shatter planets, targeting systems that locked onto the station with mechanical precision. In moments, the gathered representatives of galactic civilization would become the latest addition to the collector's grotesque amalgamation of conquered species. Then space around the station began to change. The Ghost Fleet, which had been positioned defensively around the system, suddenly wasn't where sensors indicated they should be. Instead, they materialized between the assembly station and the collector vessels, moving with impossible coordination as if reality itself was rearranging to accommodate their presence. Fleet action stations, ordered Admiral Kerrigan, her voice, carrying across hyperspace communications to all human vessels. Unknown hostiles, planet killer classification. Standard engagement protocols are suspended. Understood, replied Captain Threnody. Weapons free, reality anchors engaged, temporal shielding active. The collector fleet fired first, unleashing energies that could have sterilized worlds. The beams struck the human vessels and simply stopped. Not blocked, not deflected. Absorbed. Into weapon systems that turned the attack into ammunition for counterfire. Impossible, whispered Prex Volmundor. No shields can convert directed energy attacks into weapon charges. No shields, agreed Captain Zeth Ironhold. But human engineering isn't limited to what's possible. We specialize in making the impossible work anyway. The Ghost Fleet returned fire, and the assembly watched in stunned silence as the collectors, beings who had presumably conquered dozens of civilizations, found themselves outmatched by technology that shouldn't exist, wielded by a species that had been considered primitive just hours earlier. The battle was less a conflict than a demonstration of why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. It was also about to become very, very short. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes and 33 seconds. The collector fleet, which had harvested the accumulated technology of 40 civilizations across multiple galaxies, discovered that none of their stolen knowledge had prepared them for humanity's approach to warfare. Captain Yorick Threnody watched from the bridge of Fenris Unleashed as the final collector vessel imploded, its biomechanical hull collapsing into a singularity that his weapons officer had somehow convinced to form naturally. Around him, the Ghost Fleet maintained their defensive positions, having eliminated an extinction-level threat with the casual efficiency of exterminators dealing with particularly dangerous insects. Sensor sweep complete, reported Admiral Vex Kerrigan. No collector vessels remain functional. No additional contacts detected. System secure. Tactical analysis? Inquired Captain Zeth Ironhold, his cybernetic features displaying genuine curiosity. Primitive, was Kerrigan's assessment. They relied on overwhelming force and technological absorption. No innovation, no adaptation, no understanding of warfare as art rather than application. Disappointing, really. In the assembly chamber, the representatives sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had witnessed. A threat that their combined civilizations couldn't have hoped to defeat had been eliminated by the same humans they had rejected as too primitive for membership just 24 hours earlier. Ambassador Kelton's image remained on the central display, his expression returning to diplomatic courtesy as if the annihilation of an extragalactic invasion fleet was merely a minor interruption to their discussion. Now then, where were we? Ah, yes, humanity's membership application. The Arbitron's multifaceted consciousness rippled with something that might have been cosmic humor. I believe circumstances may have changed our perspective on humanity's qualifications. Indeed, agreed Prex Volmundor, his 7 arms moving in gestures of profound respect. Perhaps we were hasty in our initial assessment. The ethereal counselor Mix Thara flickered through dimensions of embarrassment. We may have misunderstood the nature of human contributions to galactic civilization. Not at all, replied Kelton graciously. Your assessment was entirely accurate. Humanity is emotional, violent, and by your standards, primitive. The error was in assuming these qualities were weaknesses rather than specialized tools. Captain. Threnity's image appeared alongside the ambassadors. Every species develops according to its environment. Your civilizations achieved peace and prosperity, which led to wisdom, art, and philosophical advancement. Humanity faced extinction repeatedly, which led to innovation, adaptation, and military excellence. The galaxy, added Admiral Kerrigan, needs both perspectives. Over the following hours, as the Assembly processed humanity's demonstration and the implications of the Collector attack, a new understanding began to emerge. The galaxy was not the safe, orderly place they had believed. Beyond the rim of known space, threats existed that viewed civilization as a resource to be harvested. The Yilthani representative was the first to speak the words that everyone was thinking. How many more are out there? How many collector fleets, or worse? Unknown, admitted Captain Zeth Ironhold. But based on the absorbed technology in that fleet, we estimate they've consumed at least 40 civilizations before attempting to add yours to their collection. The weight of this revelation settled over the Assembly like a physical presence. Their galaxy, which they had believed to be secure in its isolation, was actually surrounded by predators who viewed their peace as an invitation to feast. However, continued Ambassador Kelton, humanity offers a solution. Not conquest, not domination, but partnership. Your civilizations possess knowledge, wisdom, and resources that we lack. We possess capabilities that, as you've seen, you need. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in the Assembly's history, a species was granted not just membership, but full status with all rights and privileges, by acclamation rather than debate. Welcome to galactic civilization, announced the Arbitron, its ancient consciousness somehow conveying both relief and anticipation. We look forward to learning from humanity's unique perspective. As the ceremony concluded and the human delegation was formally recognized, Ambassador Kelton made one final statement that would echo through galactic history. Honored Assembly, humanity is pleased to join your civilization. We bring with us our emotions, our violence, and our primitive ways. But we also bring our promise. As long as humans stand guard, the darkness between stars will never again threaten the light of civilized worlds. The Ghost Fleet remained at the system's edge as the assembly session ended, no longer hidden but openly patrolling the boundaries of known space. They had become exactly what humanity had always been. Guardians standing watch against the dark, ensuring that those who chose peace would have the luxury of maintaining it. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most dangerous species was, also, the most necessary one. And in the depths of space, other collector fleets detected the electromagnetic signature of their destroyed brethren and began to recalculate their approach vectors. Suddenly uncertain whether this particular galaxy was worth the risk, but they would keep coming. They always did. And humanity would be waiting. The Galactic Assembly had transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable before humanity's arrival. The Great Crystalline Chamber now hosted not just debates about trade agreements and cultural exchanges, but tactical briefings and defense planning sessions. Representatives who had never considered the possibility of external threats now participated in discussions about patrol routes, early warning systems, and contingency protocols. Ambassador Kelton Voss stood before the assembly, but his role had evolved far beyond simple diplomatic liaison. The humans had established the Department of Galactic Defense, and while it carried a benign bureaucratic title, everyone understood its true purpose. It was the organization that stood between civilization and the things that lurked in the darkness between galaxies. The quarterly threat assessment, Kelton announced, activating the holographic display that had become a fixture in assembly sessions, shows encouraging progress. The display revealed a three-dimensional map of known space, dotted with indicators that would have been incomprehensible to the assembly 6 months earlier. Patrol routes traced elegant arcs through the void. Sensor networks created overlapping fields of detection, and at strategic points throughout the galaxy, human defense. Platforms maintained silent vigil. Sector 7 reports successful interdiction of what appears to have been a collector scouting probe, continued Captain Yorick Threnody, his image appearing on the display. The vessel was eliminated before it could relay our defensive positions to its fleet. The Skorthaki delegate, whose gill slits no longer sealed in terror when humans spoke, raised a tentacle in inquiry. How many probe contacts this quarter? 17 confirmed, 12 probable, 43 possibles, replied Admiral Vex Kerrigan. The pattern suggests multiple collector fleets are probing our perimeter, testing our responses. 6 months ago, such news would have caused panic. Now, the Assembly received it with the grim satisfaction of beings who understood that knowledge of the threat was preferable to ignorance of it. Prex Volmundor, whose 7 arms now coordinated with human tactical computers to process threat. Assessments had become something unexpected. A competent military analyst. The probe frequency is increasing. They're preparing for something larger. Agreed, confirmed Captain Zeth Ironhold. Long-range sensors indicate massive fleet movements in the void between galaxies. Multiple collector civilizations appear to be coordinating their efforts. The ethereal counselor Mixathara flickered through dimensions of concern, but not panic. The humans had taught the Assembly that fear was useful, but terror was counterproductive. How long before they attempt another invasion? Conservative estimate, 18 months, replied Admiral Kerrigan. Optimistic estimate, 2 years. Pessimistic estimate, they're already on their way and we just haven't detected them yet. The Yilthani representative's crystalline form pulsed, with patterns that had become familiar to the human observers, the light language equivalent of grim determination. The defense grid construction proceeds on schedule? Ahead of schedule, confirmed Kelton with satisfaction. The cooperation between human engineering and galactic resources has exceeded all projections. We now have 47 hardened defense, platforms, 300 patrol vessels, and a sensor network that extends beyond the galactic rim. What he didn't mention, and what the Assembly had learned not to ask about directly, was the Shadow Fleet. Beyond the official defense forces, humanity maintained vessels and weapons that didn't appear in any registry, operated by crews that didn't officially exist, using technologies that hadn't been officially developed. The Ghost Fleet had spawned dozens of similar formations, each one dedicated to ensuring that the galaxy's official defenses would never be tested alone. The Arbitron's ancient consciousness resonated with frequencies of approval. The cultural integration programs also show positive results. 17 species have requested human military advisors. 12 have begun adapting human tactical doctrine to their own capabilities. This was perhaps the most remarkable development of all. The galaxy's peaceful species were learning to think like warriors, not because they had become violent, but because they had recognized that sometimes violence applied by the right beings at the right time was the only thing that preserved peace. The Hexarch Coalition's new patrol formations are particularly impressive, noted Captain Threnody. They've adapted human swarm tactics to their collective consciousness networks. Their coordination is becoming superior to our own in some circumstances. The Vrex Empire's crystalline hulls have proven surprisingly effective when configured according to human ablative armor principles, added Admiral Kerrigan. Their ships can now survive direct hits from collector bioweapons. The assembly had learned to fight, but more importantly, they had learned to think like beings who understood that the universe contained things that needed to be fought. The transformation had been profound and irreversible. As the session concluded, Ambassador Kelton made his final announcement. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various other classifications, humanity is proud to report that the galaxy remains secure. Our vigil continues, our defenses strengthen, and our resolve remains absolute. The representatives filed out with the quiet confidence of beings who knew they were protected by guardians who took their responsibilities seriously. As they departed, many paused to acknowledge the human observers, not with the condescension they had once shown, but with the respect due to those who stood watch so others could sleep peacefully. Later, in the private chambers reserved for human use, the Ghost Fleet commanders gathered for their own briefing, the one that dealt with threats too dangerous to discuss in open session. The deep space monitors detected something at the edge of detection range, reported Captain Zeth Ironhold, his cybernetic features displaying concern. Multiple fleets, but not collectors. Something else. Something that makes the collectors look like scavengers by comparison. Analysis? Requested Admiral Kerrigan. Preliminary data suggests a species that doesn't just harvest civilizations, they remake them, convert entire populations into extensions of their own consciousness. If the readings are accurate, we're looking at a threat that makes extinction seem merciful by comparison. Captain Threnody nodded grimly. Time frame? 5 years minimum, possibly 10 if we're fortunate. The commanders absorbed this information with the calm professionalism of beings who had spent their lives preparing for threats that others couldn't imagine. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, something was coming that would test humanity's promise to protect galactic civilization. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, the galaxy was safe, and that was enough. As the meeting adjourned, each commander returned to their vessels, scattered throughout known space like antibodies. In a vast organism, they would continue their eternal patrol, watching for threats and preparing for the battles that others would never need to know had been fought. Ambassador Kelton remained behind, looking out through the transparent aluminum of his chamber at the stars that now represented not just exploration opportunities, but responsibilities. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not as conquerors or even as explorers, but as the beings who ensured that others could continue to explore in safety. In the depths of space, ancient threats stirred and began their slow approach toward the light of civilization. But they would find something waiting for them that they had never encountered before, a species that had learned to turn love into warfare, fear into strength, and desperation into victory. The galaxy slept peacefully, guarded by monsters who chose to be heroes, and in the darkness, other monsters learned to fear the dark.